as I was watching a sister media outlet of Canal 24 and Canal 27 of French television called France Info, this just a few hours after the death of Queen Elizabeth II was announced on September 8, 2022, something unusual caught my attention. This unusual thing that caught my attention was the oddity that French television was dedicating a great number of his broadcast time to the death of the beloved British Queen Elizabeth II. This television station, France Info, is specialized in broadcasting news from what happened not just in France and Europe, but all over the world. But they only dedicate a few minutes to report each event in their broadcast. And then they repeat over and over the segments of their news program throughout the rest of the day. The issues that are occupying most of the French media these days is the prix de carburant, the price of fuel, the changement climatique, climate change, le pouvoir d'achat, purchasing power, and la transition énergétique, energy transition. I try to comprehend why this was happening because I never have seen it before. I usually watch this station daily for 2 or 3 hours in the morning and later at noon, and they never behave the way they were doing right now. Therefore, I became puzzled. All came to a semi-climax on 12 September 2022 for the Scottish Thanksgiving service when the British marched in a funerary event from Windsor Palace in London to the St Giles Church of Edinburgh, Scotland, where the Queen had been born 96 years before in 1926. What was happening? Why was the French press so enthusiastically dedicating most of their programming for Queen Elizabeth II? It gladdened my heart that they were doing this, but why? I asked myself once again. After all, the media in France did not seem to be impressed too much this day with European royalty or kingdoms, and this was so because they had had the French Revolution and they had gotten rid of their monarchy violently and had established their République Française more than 200 years ago. Thus, they were not in a mood to speak or write with love for anything good Britannia had done or would do. This was so because the Brits had just broken their hearts when they decided to dump the socialist European Union and become a free United Kingdom again. I decided to record with my cameras some of the footage of the French and BBC television covering the event, and I'm using a portion of it in the creation of this video. In the hours and days that followed, I became aware too that it was not just the French media, but the international media as well that had been covering the departure from mortality of Queen Elizabeth II. And not only that, but people from most nations on earth were mourning for her death and showing their sympathy for her. In addition, heads of states from kingdoms and republics alike, many of which had no connection whatsoever to England, had nonetheless pledged to attend her funeral. It captured my attention even more when I became aware of the news that many governments in many countries, including Brazil, had decided to half stack their nation flags. And many citizens of the world had been found with teary eyes and weeping for the loss of the Queen, even when they had never met her, even more being part of the greatest empire that ever was, the British Empire. At this point, I realized that a gigantic worldwide historic phenomenon of unmeasurable magnitude was taking place on planet Earth as an homage to the deceased royalty. This was a phenomenon never seen before in all the history of the human race, and I wondered about the reason for it. Yes, never before in history, from the creation of Adam to modern times, a deceased world leader has received so much attention, expression of love, and global recognition and reverence at the moment of his death and funeral. This is never before none of the Egyptian pharaohs, Roman emperors, monarchs, dictators, celebrities, or democratic elected leaders from any nation had ever had an outpouring of sympathy, recognition of life, and expression of love at their funerals as Queen Elizabeth was having. Here I'm showing just a few reels or small tracks of the broadcast, but this is just a portion of it. It just lasted for hours, and they repeated the news later on. I couldn't show more of their broadcasts because it's copyright violation. I'm not allowed to do that, and also I silence the sound that they have in the broadcast. Undoubtedly, this short in physical stature woman, by gigantic in gentleness, humbleness, and meekness of heart, had done something very special or worthy of praise, which was causing all of this in the world. And then, as I thought about what it was, the answer to my question of why this grandiose global mourning and oblation occurred for her, not just in England and her former imperial colonies all over the five continents on Earth, but also in lands which never had anything to do with the British Empire, something started to clear in my mind. And this was the commandment and advice of the Lord Christ through many dispensations to his disciples and to all of his Father's children who strive or aspire in this life to obtain eternal life. And this is, take example of me, who am humble and meek of heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls. And take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy, and light is my burden. It's very likely that Queen Elizabeth learned these words from the Lord in her King James Version of the Bible when she was still a child, or maybe she learned them later on, perhaps 70 years ago, when she became a ruling monarch, or perhaps she learned this from her spiritual mentors in Sunday school in the Church of England, of which she was the absolute leader. Whatever the case may be, she was humble and meek of heart. As the ruling monarch of Britain, the greatest empire that ever was, she could have been arrogant, proud, and pompous, as other leaders are when they gain political power and fortune. This unusual thing that caught my attention was the oddity that French television was dedicating a great number of his broadcast time to the death of the beloved British Queen Elizabeth II. The Lord has also said, "He that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that abaseth himself shall be exalted." I think that here must be the answer to what has happened. As Queen Elizabeth lived her life humble and meek of heart, and abased herself to her Father in heaven, who brought her to this earth, her Maker has exalted her before many nations at the moment of her departure from this mortality. Yes, indeed, divine intervention has been at work here, to exalt in her death who was so humble and kind during her life. Therefore, may she, as the French might say, this kind and gentle Madame Regne, rest with joy and love in the kingdom of the Lord Christ, whose kingdom has no end but exists forever and ever with joy and happiness.